today is your first time of coming, you're welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, you're equally welcome. So today we'll be taking a look at CSS positioning property. CSS positioning property is basically the way an element is structured on your web page. Yes, by default, every element is positioned in the static position, and there are other various types of positioning you can as well implement in your document to give you what you want and the look you are going for. We have the fixed, we have the sticky, we have the absolute, and we have the relative. So in this video, I'll be describing the types of CSS positioning we have and how it works and how to use it. So at the end of this video, you will be an expert in CSS positioning, and this will help you as you build your web pages. Why not stick around while we get into it? I've already written some code, HTML and CSS code. I'll add a link to my GitHub account in case if you need to copy the code to kind of show you the CSS positioning. I mentioned earlier that by default an element comes in the static position, and to examine that you kind of right click, go to inspect, then you go to compute head, and you can filter out position. Yeah, you can see that it comes in the static position. For the position sticky, an element with position sticky is positioned based on the user's scroll position. So we want it to, like, when we scroll, the element will be stick to the top and every other thing will go under it. And for the element sticky, you put sticky with CSS rule of top. Let's say we stop 0. So with this, when you're scrolling, it sticks the element at the user's viewpoint. You scroll and every other element will go under it. So that's that for element sticky. Now for the fixed position, an element with position fixed is position relative to the viewpoint, which means it always stays in the same place even if the page is scrolled. The top, right, bottom, and left properties are used to position the fixed position. A fixed element does not leave a gap in the page where it would normally have been located. So let's give the second one a position fixed. And we'll give it a bottom of 0. And we'll give it a top of 0. A right of 0. We'll give it a right of 0. When you give it a right of 0, it moves the element downwards, and if you want to give it a left of 0 as well, it moves it to the left. It moves it to the left part of the page. So that's how the element the fixed position works. So the fixed element, it doesn't leave a gap in the page where it would normally have been located. So as you can see, once the second element leaves, which is the 2 elements, there is no gap between the 1 and 3. It kind of fills up the gap. So that's the difference between the fixed. The fixed is it sticks to the top or stick to the bottom, wherever you want it, to the viewer scrolling, while the fixed moves the element to whichever part of the page you want it to move, and it's fixed in that spot. So that's that for the fixed positioning. For the third one, we use the relative positioning. An element with position relative is positioned relative to its normal position. Setting the top, right, bottom, and left properties of a relatively positioned element will cause it to be adjusted away from its normal position. Other contents will not be adjusted to fit into any gap left by the element. For instance, when we did the fixed positioning, there was no gap between the element 1 and element 3. because the fixed positioning fills the gap. But when we use the relative positioning, nothing fills the gap. So the relative positioning will make it left 30 pixels. So it moves towards the right, and relative positioning moves in reverse to the CSS rule you are giving. If you give it a left, it moves it to the right. If you give it a right, it moves the element to the left. If you give it a top, it moves it to bottom, and if you give it a bottom, it moves it to the right. For instance, when we give this a left, make it 80 pixels, it moves it to the right. And when we change this left to right, it moves it to the left. And as well, if we change this to top, it will move it to the bottom. And if we change top to bottom, it moves it to the top. So that's how the CSS rules behave with the relative positioning. The space it leaves is not filled by any element. That's the difference between the fixed and the relative element. The next positioning we'll take a look at is the absolute positioning. Okay, the absolute positioning gives an unexpected behavior. It's position relative to the nearest position ancestor instead of the position relative to the viewpoint. So if an absolute position element has no position ancestor, it uses the document's body and moves along with the page scrolling. When you give the absolute positioning, it gives an unexpected behavior to the element. And when you add some offset properties, it can as well make the element to disappear. For instance, if we add the top of 50 pixels and we'll add the left of 0, it can give an unexpected behavior to the element, and it can as well move the element around. So that's that for absolute positioning. And like we mentioned earlier, every element comes with the static position at the earlier stage. Try the static positioning. The elements are not affected by the top, bottom, left, and right property. Static position is always positioned to the normal flow of the page. The left or right effect doesn't work on the static position. For instance, when we give the fifth element static position, so this is the fifth one, and maybe we'll use a top of 100 pixels. Nothing changes. If we use a right of 100 pixels, nothing changes as well. This shows that once an element is statically positioned, the CSS rule of right, left, bottom, or right doesn't work on it. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope with this you've been able to understand how the CSS positioning works. I will leave a link of my GitHub so that if you want to, get your hands dirty with the CSS rule and play around in this playground, you should be able to do that. I hope to see you on the next one. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until the next one. Bye.